We'll never see her smile again or hear her laughter. We'll never see her grow, achieve her dreams, or the life she deserves.
In a world where family is supposed to offer kindness and care, it's unimaginable that anyone could commit such monstrous acts against their own. Yet, these ruthless killers show that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places. From Khloe Driver's cold-blooded murder to Kirkland Warren's jaw-dropping betrayals, these cases will leave you speechless. Let's begin.
I see her everywhere, in everything. She lives on and shows me that beauty can be found anywhere.
On December 8, 2020, in the quiet neighborhood of Canton, Georgia, police responded to a harrowing scene. A 13-month-old baby girl, Hannah Nicole Driver, had been brutally killed. Her mother, 24-year-old Khloe Driver, was arrested at the scene after attempting to take her own life. Khloe, accompanied by a group believed to be part of a traveling cult, stopped at a home in the Mountain View neighborhood. Shortly after arriving, Khloe took a knife, locked herself in a bedroom with Hannah, and stabbed her daughter 4 times. The baby's father desperately tried to save her, but tragically, Hannah was pronounced dead on the scene. Khloe survived her self-inflicted wounds. When the case was trialed, her defense rested on an insanity plea. She claimed that her mental illness had driven her to commit an unthinkable act, a tragic moment she said she could barely comprehend herself. Her defense painted her as a deeply troubled young woman, overwhelmed by struggles beyond her control. But the prosecution told a much different story, one that sent chills through the courtroom. They described a mother whose behavior after the crime showed no sign of remorse. Instead, they portrayed her as cold and indifferent to the unspeakable loss of her child.
I wanted to see if she was okay because, she was running from them. And then they had got a hold of her and was dragging her back to the apartments that were right there.
The trial was deeply emotional. Police officers who had first arrived at the scene gave tearful testimonies, recounting the devastating moment they found 13-month-old Hannah. Jurors struggled to contain their emotions as they viewed crime scene photos and body camera footage, each image revealing the heartbreaking details of the baby's final moments. In the end, the courtroom was filled with an overwhelming sense of sorrow. The innocence of a baby lost and the unimaginable actions of a mother left everyone grappling with the weight of the tragedy, their hearts heavy with grief and disbelief. The 6-day trial of Khloe Driver was a heartbreaking journey through the tragic loss of 13-month-old Hannah. Over 21 witnesses came forward, and 135 pieces of evidence were presented.
I am being forced to get into a truck with Binyam and Kyle or Brian Joyce to see my daughter again because he has kept her away from me.
He is the next of kin in this case, so our office makes contact with the next of kin to the victims, and we had done that on occasion.
Okay.
Along with it, including chilling 911 calls and crime scene photos. Each day in court revealed more details of that fateful day, leaving everyone grappling with the unimaginable. Khloe's defense focused on her mental health. 3 psychologists testified about her profound struggles, and Khloe herself spoke, expressing deep regret for what had happened. Her lawyers argued that her mental illness clouded her judgment and drove her to a tragic act that she could never undo.
Guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but mentally ill. Count 5, cruelty to children in the first degree. Guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but mentally ill.
But the prosecution painted a starkly different picture. They described Khloe as a mother who showed little care for her child, even during the trial. They pointed to moments where her behavior seemed cold and inappropriate, arguing that her actions showed a troubling lack of accountability. They highlighted how her choices led to Hannah's heartbreaking end, leaving no room for excuses. The courtroom was filled with grief and conflicting emotions. The evidence told a painful story, but the memories of baby Hannah brought a shared hope of justice and healing to the wake of such an unspeakable tragedy.
You were attempting to save her life, and that
he
was attempting to save Hannah's life.
Yeah, he was.
Did you care about Kawani and Hannah?
Of course.
Do you still care about them?
Yeah.
The jury rejected Khloe's insanity plea, finding her guilty but mentally ill. She was convicted of malice murder, felony murder, child cruelty, and aggravated assault. Judge McCallia sentenced her to life in prison with the chance of parole plus 20 years, while acknowledging the trauma inflicted on everyone involved. During the time of trial, Khloe gets emotional as she feels guilty for what she did to her daughter.
This state would dictate that you would serve 30 years of a life sentence before you were considered for parole.
This case struck at the deepest levels of human emotion. A mother tackling her child's life is an act that defies comprehension. The community mourned the loss of an innocent baby while struggling to understand the profound darkness that led to this tragedy. During the hearing, the father of the baby said, "This woman took my daughter's life."
Where I sat for 3 months in a van just screaming and screaming and screaming that this woman believed that she was entitled to take my daughter's life out of this world.
Khloe Driver's heart-wrenching crime devastated a family. Breaking news: Evil Lives Here now has merch. Support the channel and grab your gear today. Check the link in the description. But the next case takes a dark turn with a shocking betrayal that led to the death of a husband.
It has been so hard to go through all of this for the last 3.5+ years after what I went through.
On a quiet day in 2012, tragedy struck a family in Carlsbad, California, when Julie Harper was sentenced to 40 years in prison for killing her husband. Julie Harper, 39 at the time, shot and killed her husband, Jason Harper, in their upstairs bedroom. Meanwhile, their 3 children were downstairs, unaware of the horrific event unfolding above them. Julie claimed that the shooting was an accident, a desperate act of self-defense during a heated argument. She testified that Jason, an athletic and spirited man, charged at her, and the gun went off unintentionally. However, the story is not like that. Investigators uncovered troubling details, including Julie's preparation of a getaway bag filled with passports and cash, suggesting she planned to flee.
Harper told them to look in a blue backpack now at his house for attorney's fees. Inside, nearly $40,000 in cash.
Julie Harper's case took a dramatic turn as it unfolded in court. At first, during her initial trial, she was acquitted of first-degree murder, leaving her family and the public divided over what had truly happened on that fateful day. According to Julie, her husband mistreated her for years, and on that day he was doing the same. But in a retrial in 2015, a jury reviewed the evidence again and found her guilty of second-degree murder for the death of her husband, Jason Harper.
Julie Harper talked about the day she killed her husband. She said she and her husband Jason started fighting about money in their bedroom when he got violent.
The judge handed down a 15-year to life sentence, but an additional 25 years were added because Julie had used a firearm during the crime. This brought her total sentence to 40 years to life, ensuring she would spend decades behind bars. Years later, Julie sought to shorten her sentence, citing a new California Supreme Court ruling that allowed judges more flexibility in reducing firearm-related penalties. She hoped this could give her a chance for an earlier release. However, the prosecution firmly opposed her request, arguing that Julie's actions, including disposing of the murder weapon and preparing a getaway bag, made her a danger to public safety. They believed her sentence should remain intact to reflect the seriousness of her crime. On a quiet Thursday morning, the courtroom fell silent as Superior Court Judge Blaine Bowman made his final decision. Julie Harper, who had been convicted of killing her husband Jason, sat anxiously as the judge upheld her original 40-year to life sentence, rejecting her appeal. The prosecution painted a clear picture of Julie's actions, emphasizing the troubling details surrounding the case. They pointed out that Julie had never shown genuine remorse for taking Jason's life. Adding to the suspicion, the murder weapon was never found, and evidence suggested Julie had intentionally gotten rid of it.
Grabbed me by the arms, began shaking me forcefully.
Julie says she feared for her life.
Prosecutors also highlighted that Julie had prepared a getaway bag with passports and cash, which they argued showed she had plans to flee after the tragic event. These actions, they claimed, reflected a calculated attempt to escape responsibility for her crime. Judge Bowman agreed, stating that reducing Julie's sentence would not serve justice. His decision was met with quiet relief by Jason's grieving family. Though the courtroom proceedings concluded, the emotional weight of the tragedy lingered. Jason's loved ones left the courthouse with heavy hearts, finding some solace in knowing that the sentence upheld the memory of a life taken too soon. Julie Harper was sentenced to 40 years to life for killing her husband. Jason's family, including his mother Lena, expressed relief at the decision, insisting that justice for Jason must be served. They believed Julie should serve at least as many years as she took from her husband's life.
For a total term of 40 years to life in state prison. Do we have, and from probation, quit your appearance for probation, I failed to get that.
There wasn't a hint of remorse, only a quiet determination. She explained each of her actions with clarity, revealing that every choice she made was driven by the instinct to protect herself. It wasn't recklessness or malice, it was survival.
Allows the judge discretion over the gun allegation, which added 25 years to life to her sentence. It was mandatory in California until just this year. Now her turn to appeal it.
This heartbreaking case left a family shattered. For Jason's loved ones, the memories of his vibrant personality were overshadowed by the devastating loss. While justice brought some closure, the emotional scars remain. Even Julie's children show remorse for their dad, saying to their mother that, "I don't want to call her mom." Justice was served, but the scars of this tragedy will remain forever.
Julie would usually be asleep.
You called your mom Julie, is that right?
Yes.
Is that what you call her now?
Yes.
How come you started calling her Julie?
Because I don't want to say that she is my mom.
Charlie Adelson's case continues to evoke strong emotions. The next case is the shocking murder plot, which leaves everyone speechless.
Two sentencing in the state of Florida versus Catherine Magbanowa, 2016 CF 3036 and 2018 CF 497.
In 2014, Florida State University law professor Dan Markel was tragically shot and killed at his home in Tallahassee. His murder unraveled a shocking conspiracy involving his former brother-in-law, Charlie Adelson. Once a respected periodontist, Charlie was later convicted in a murder-for-hire plot that would devastate multiple families. Dan Markel's murder wasn't a random act of violence. It was the result of a deep family conflict. At the time of his death, Dan was going through a difficult custody battle with his ex-wife, Wendy Adelson. Their two young children were at the center of this emotional dispute. Wendy's brother, Charlie Adelson, who was a successful periodontist, became entangled in this struggle as the conflict between his sister and Dan escalated. In a series of unfortunate events, Charlie allegedly took matters into his own hands. It's believed that he wanted to end the ongoing family feud and ensure a resolution to the custody battle, even if it meant taking the most drastic step. Through a carefully planned murder-for-hire scheme, Charlie arranged for two hitmen to carry out the crime. Dan's murder, which occurred in 2014, shocked the community and devastated Dan's family and friends. The investigation unraveled a dark web of conspiracy, eventually pointing to Charlie Adelson as the mastermind. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation. What started as a personal dispute between a husband and wife tragically led to a loss of life and shattered a family in the process.
I do.
You may stand.
Stand. I would just like to say that I maintain my innocence.
After years of investigation, the truth behind Dan Markel's tragic death began to emerge. In 2023, Charlie Adelson's trial finally took place. It was an intense 8-day process that uncovered shocking details of the crime. The prosecution presented crucial evidence, including secretly recorded conversations where Charlie was heard discussing the murder plot. These recordings linked him to the two hitmen who carried out the crime, as well as their intermediary, who helped facilitate the murder for hire. As the trial progressed, the pieces of the puzzle came together, revealing Charlie's role in orchestrating the entire plot. The jury, after carefully considering the evidence, found him guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation. Leon Circuit Judge Stephen Everett, after hearing the verdict, sentenced Charlie to life in prison for the murder of Dan Markel. In addition to the life sentence, Charlie received 30-year sentences for the conspiracy and solicitation charges, all of which would be served consecutively. Though the legal process didn't bring back Dan, it provided a sense of justice for his family, knowing that Charlie would face the consequences for his role in such a devastating loss. Charlie Adelson is now serving his life sentence in a South Dakota prison. However, his lawyer recently filed a motion for resentencing on 2 counts. During the sentence, he didn't show remorse. Citing errors in the sentencing scoresheet, the request, if granted, could reduce his sentence, though it wouldn't affect his life term for the murder.
Read, if there can please be no expressions, either of shock or anger, please.
In a dramatic turn of events following the tragic murder of law professor Dan Markel, Catherine Magbanowa faced justice after years of legal battles. Initially tried in 2019 alongside Siegfried Garcia, her case ended in a mistrial when the jury couldn't reach a verdict. However, her retrial in May 2022 brought closure. On May 27, 2022, the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder. Magbanowa received a life sentence without parole, along with 2 additional 30-year sentences.
We, the jury, find as follows as to count 2. A. The defendant is guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder.
The murder left an indelible mark on the lives of Markel's family and friends. For the public, the case serves as a chilling reminder of how greed and resentment can lead to devastating consequences. Adelson's case shows a terrifying story that leaves everyone in shock and disbelief. But the next case uncovers a mother's horrifying act of violence.
We still love Michelle as a wife, mother, and friend, and hope that she receives the treatment that she needs.
In October 2008, Michelle Kehoe, a mother from Coralville, Iowa, drove her 2 sons to a secluded spot near Littleton. What followed was a horrific act that would leave one of her sons dead and the other severely injured. Michelle taped their eyes shut and then slashed their throats with a knife before attempting to take her own life. In October 2008, Michelle Kehoe took her 2 sons to a quiet, secluded area near Littleton, Iowa. It was a trip that would change their lives forever. In a shocking and heartbreaking moment, Michelle, in a fit of anger and confusion, taped their eyes shut and then attacked them with a knife. Tragically, her 2-year-old son, who was too young to understand the horror around him, lost his life to the brutal wounds. Her 7-year-old son, however, showed incredible strength and resilience. Despite the terrifying attack, he survived and, as difficult as it must have been, he courageously testified in court about what happened that day. Initially, Michelle tried to shift the blame, telling authorities that a stranger had attacked them. However, the truth soon came out. After some time, she admitted that she was the one responsible for the tragedy. The boy's bravery and the heartbreaking loss of his little brother left the community in shock. It was a devastating moment for everyone who knew the family, especially as a mother was the one who caused the harm. Despite her confession, the legal system had to carry out its duty to ensure justice for the surviving child.
Guilty of murder in the first degree, dated November 5, 2009, by Anthony L. Buter, presiding juror.
As Michelle Kehoe's trial began, the case became more complicated than anyone expected. Despite her confession, Michelle's defense team argued that she wasn't mentally fit to stand trial. They believed that her troubled mental health played a significant role in the attack, and that this should have been a central part of her defense. Her lawyers claimed that Michelle wasn't in the right state of mind when she made the confession to the police, and that her statements should not have been used against her.
Strategy to get, quote, your story out through the experts, because then you wouldn't be subjected to cross-examination.
The defense also argued that her attorney during the trial had failed to properly protect her rights, especially when it came to the statements she made while in the hospital. According to them, these statements were influenced by her mental health struggles and should not have been admitted as evidence. The defense hoped that the court would consider her mental health history and show mercy, acknowledging her struggles. Despite these claims, the court ruled otherwise. The judges determined that Michelle understood what she had done, the charges against her, and the process of her trial. They found that her confession was given voluntarily, without coercion, and that she was fit to stand trial. The Iowa Court of Appeals rejected her appeal, confirming that Michelle Kehoe was fit to stand trial. The judges concluded that she understood the charges against her and had voluntarily confessed to the crime. In the end, Michelle was convicted of murder and attempted murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole and is currently serving her sentence at the Mitchellville Women's Prison.
Society has overall suffered because of your actions and because of the decisions that you made.
As the trial went on, Michelle became overwhelmed with emotion. The weight of what she had done hit her hard, and as the evidence was presented, she started to lose her composure. Her voice shook, and tears filled her eyes. It was clear she now fully understood the seriousness of her actions and felt deep regret.
And I want to express my deep sorrow. I hope that was for healing, for showing, for change, for my friends and family.
This tragic case left a community in shock. The horror of a mother turning against her children is almost impossible to comprehend. While the surviving son's courage in testifying helped secure justice, the grief of losing a young life and the trauma of surviving such an attack will stay with him forever. The case also highlights the importance of mental health and understanding the complexities of crime and justice. Michelle Kehoe's shocking crime was a heart-wrenching betrayal. Next is the chilling crime that left an entire community in shock.
Almost every weekend, and when those weekends come back up, I don't get to see her anymore.
In March 2023, a horrific tragedy unfolded in Clark County, Washington, when Kirkland Warren brutally murdered his former girlfriend, Michelle Melendez, and her 7-year-old daughter, Layla Stewart. Their bodies were found on March 22, 2023, in a rural area near Washougal, with both victims suffering gunshot wounds to the head. This crime was not only devastating for their family and friends, but it also left the community in shock. Just days before the tragic deaths of Michelle Melendez and her daughter Layla, Warren's violence had already escalated. Earlier, he had fired shots at Michelle's apartment, prompting her to take the crucial step of obtaining a protection order against him. Despite this legal safeguard, Warren's aggression continued, leading to even more devastating consequences. The warning signs were all there, yet he chose to ignore them, escalating his actions further. His crime against Michelle and Layla was part of a deeply troubling pattern of behavior. Beyond the horrific murders, there were disturbing allegations of child harm, adding to the fear and pain felt by all who knew them. His actions left a permanent scar on the families who loved Michelle and Layla, a loss that could never be repaired by any form of justice. The families were left grappling with the weight of their grief, knowing that no sentence or punishment could undo the harm Warren caused. For the victims' loved ones, the story wasn't just one of murder. It was about a series of signs that were ignored, a pattern of violence that ultimately shattered lives and left a community struggling to understand how such cruelty could unfold. After a lengthy and emotional series of court hearings, Kirkland Warren finally admitted his guilt in a shocking and heartbreaking turn of events. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of aggravated first-degree murder for the tragic deaths of his former girlfriend, Michelle Melendez, and her 7-year-old daughter, Layla Stewart. He also pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. In addition, Warren entered an Alford plea for charges of child harm, which meant he acknowledged there was enough evidence to convict him, though he continued to maintain his innocence.
Is that correct, Mr. Warren? You'd like to enter a not guilty plea today? Not guilty pleas received.
This plea came just days before his trial was scheduled to begin, sparing the grieving families from having to endure the painful and difficult details of the case in the courtroom. The families, though thankful to avoid further trauma, were still overwhelmed with the unfillable void left by the loss of their loved ones. Despite the legal process moving forward, no amount of justice could erase the unimaginable pain they felt. The empty spaces in their hearts and homes were a constant reminder that no verdict could ever bring Michelle and Layla back. The real punishment for the families was the enduring grief of losing 2 beloved lives so cruelly. On October 8, 2024, Kirkland Warren was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. He will never again be able to harm anyone. However, the scars left on the families of Michelle and Layla will remain forever. Still, he shows no remorse for his actions. The community, although relieved by the conviction, knows that no sentence will ever truly make up for the loss of 2 innocent lives.
Given the nature of this particular charge, it could result in potentially a life imprisonment under the provisions of ISRB. And you've talked about that with your attorneys, so...
The pain was obvious in the courtroom as family members spoke out. Layla's aunt and grandmother expressed how their lives were shattered by the loss of Layla and Michelle. "The day I lost them, I lost a part of myself," said Nicole Norris, Michelle's mother. The emotional weight of the case was felt by everyone present, and even the prosecutors, who had worked tirelessly for justice, struggled to hold back their emotions. For the families of the victims, the sentence was not a relief. It was a reminder of a pain that would never go away.
The orders are false security blankets. He was released with no GPS in the first place. We're angry.
Next, we turn to Matthew Locke, whose shocking actions exposed a dark and violent turn in what seemed like an ordinary life.
When a Ware man convicted of murdering a woman and her 3 children in West Brookfield was just sentenced to life in prison without parole.
On March 1st, 2018, police were called to a home on Old Warren Road in West Brookfield, Massachusetts, for a well-being check. What they found was a scene that would haunt the community for years. Inside an upstairs bedroom lay the bodies of Sarah Bermudez, a 38-year-old mother, and her 3 children, Madison, 8, James, 6, and Michael, 2. Their lives had been brutally taken, and the house bore evidence of an attempted fire. DNA and other clues soon pointed to the person responsible for this ruthless crime, 38-year-old Matthew Locke, Sarah's cousin's husband. Locke's actions on that tragic day stemmed from a desperate and destructive binge. According to prosecutors, he was searching for money or substances when he killed Sarah and her children in cold blood. To cover his tracks, he set a fire in the house, but it burned itself out, leaving behind crucial evidence. Locke's DNA was found on 2 of the victims, tying him irrefutably to the crime scene. This wasn't Locke's first violent act. In 2010, he had set fire to his ex-girlfriend's property in Maine while she and her children were inside. Although they survived, Locke served time for that crime. However, his dark tendencies resurfaced in 2018 with devastating consequences. After years of investigation, Matthew Locke finally faced trial, and the seriousness of his crimes weighed heavily on everyone in the courtroom. The prosecutors presented their case clearly, showing how Locke had planned and carried out the brutal murders. They explained how he not only killed Sarah and her 3 children, but also tried to hide his actions of armed burglary and arson by setting fires and breaking into their home.
A little more than a month ago, Locke was found guilty of killing his cousin's wife, 38-year-old Sarah Bermudez, and her 3 children.
The jury listened carefully and made their decision. Guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder, burglary, and arson. On Thursday, justice was finally served in Worcester Superior Court. District Attorney Joe Early spoke to the court with emotion, calling the murders some of the worst his office had ever seen. His words showed how deeply this tragedy affected the community and the strong commitment of everyone involved to bring justice for Sarah and her children. Matthew Locke sat silently in the courtroom as the judge announced his punishment. He was sentenced to 4 life terms, 1 for each of the murders he committed, ensuring he would never leave prison. But still, he shows no remorse for his act. On top of that, he received 2 more sentences of 19 to 20 years for armed burglary and arson, but those would be served at the same time. This meant Locke would spend the rest of his life behind bars, unable to hurt anyone else. A life once full of decisions was now reduced to a prison cell, justice delivered for the innocent lives he had taken.
Who killed his cousin's wife and her 3 children has learned that he'll spend life behind bars. Matthew Locke cried as the victim's loved ones read impact statements.
Each member of my family deserves their own particular, I think, their own justice as an individual and even as a whole.
For the family and friends of Sarah Bermudez and her children, this day marked a bittersweet victory. While nothing could bring back the victims, the sentencing provided a sense of closure. The courtroom felt the weight of justice as Locke's fate was sealed. While Locke's crime was born from a substance-fueled rage, what about Babis Anagnostopoulos' chilling betrayal, which was crafted from a web of lies?
This is Babis Anagnostopoulos. Her daughter, his wife, murdered just a few weeks before. But now police say that he was the murderer who nearly concealed his crime.
Babis Anagnostopoulos seemed to have it all: charm, good looks, and a successful career as a helicopter pilot. But on May 11, 2021, his life took a shocking turn. His wife, Caroline Crouch, was found dead in their Athens home, and Babis initially claimed that armed robbers had killed her. As the investigation unfolded, cracks in his story began to appear. Digital evidence and inconsistencies in his timeline led to a confession. Babis admitted to murdering Caroline in a fit of anger, unraveling the life he had carefully constructed, leaving a trail of heartbreak and betrayal in his wake. On May 11, 2021, Caroline Crouch, a British Greek woman, was found dead in her home in Glykonera, Athens. Her husband, Babis, initially claimed that a gang of robbers had broken into their home, killed the family dog, and murdered Caroline. He even pretended to be a victim, bound and gagged by the supposed thieves.
Όταν συνειδητοποίησα ότι η γυναίκα σου δεν βρίσκεται στη ζωή. Όταν με έλυσαν οι αστυνομοί. Όταν ήρθαν οι αστυνομοί μέσα και με έλυσαν και έβγαλαν από το κεφάλι μου τα δεσμό.
His account seemed believable, but over the next few weeks, investigators started to notice discrepancies. No evidence of a break-in, no fingerprints or DNA from any thieves, and suspicious details about his own devices began to raise questions. As the investigation into Caroline Crouch's death progressed, investigators began to notice unsettling discrepancies in Babis Anagnostopoulos' story. Digital evidence from the couple's devices painted a different picture than the one he had described. Surveillance footage revealed that the timeline he had given, claiming that robbers had broken in at 4:30 a.m., was false. The evidence showed that their memory card from the security camera had been removed hours earlier, and Caroline's biometric watch indicated her heart stopped beating at 4:11 a.m. Additionally, data from Babis' mobile phone revealed activity during the time he claimed to have been tied up and unable to move. With mounting pressure from the investigators, Babis eventually cracked and confessed. He admitted that the so-called robbery was a fabrication designed to cover up the truth. The real motive was a troubled marriage marked by constant arguments. In a fit of anger, Babis murdered Caroline, ending her life in cold blood. In a tense and dramatic trial, Babis Anagnostopoulos was found guilty of premeditated murder for the death of his wife, Caroline Crouch, as well as animal mistreatment for killing the family dog. The court heard how Babis had meticulously staged a robbery to cover up the crime, playing the role of a grieving husband and father, even as he falsely blamed foreign thieves for the murder. However, investigators uncovered discrepancies in his story, leading to his confession after a thorough examination of digital evidence. In the end, the jury sentenced Babis to life in prison for Caroline's murder, along with an additional 10 years for killing the dog and misleading authorities. He was also ordered to pay a fine of €21,000. Despite his calculated efforts to manipulate the public's perception of him, the truth eventually caught up with him, leaving a family shattered and a nation in disbelief over his betrayal. What had started as a tragic story of a young mother's death quickly turned into one of betrayal and heartbreak. People across Greece and the world felt deceived by Babis' cold manipulation. His confession shattered the image of a grieving husband and loving father, replacing it with one of a man who had fooled an entire nation. Caroline's family, devastated by her loss, won custody of her daughter Lydia, who would grow up far from the man who had taken her mother's life. The emotional toll of this case rippled through the media, and the story of how Babis Anagnostopoulos fooled the world resonated deeply with audiences around the globe. Babis' absence of remorse underscores the disturbing nature of his crime, setting the stage for Marvin Patterson's equally harrowing story.
A 19-year-old charged with murdering his ex-girlfriend. Marvin Patterson was in a car with 18-year-old Kiara Brown when he pointed a gun at her and it went off.
In March 2018, a tragic shooting occurred in Milwaukee near 99th and Carmen. 18-year-old Kiara Brown was fatally shot by 20-year-old Marvin Patterson. The shooting happened when Patterson claimed that he had accidentally pointed the gun at Kiara's head and it went off. This incident left a grieving family behind, especially Kiara's mother, Kenesha Brown Perry, who is now struggling to cope with the loss of her daughter. Marvin Patterson was arrested and charged with the shooting death of Kiara Brown, but the case quickly became complicated. Initially, Patterson confessed to the crime, and it seemed like the case would be straightforward. However, problems arose during the trial. Key evidence, including Patterson's police interview, was thrown out due to violations of his Miranda rights, which meant that his statements could not be used against him. To make matters worse, the state's key witness failed to appear in court, leaving the prosecution with little to support their case. With the evidence weakened, Patterson was able to negotiate a plea deal. Instead of facing charges of murder, he pled guilty to a lesser offense, significantly reducing the severity of his punishment. What seemed like a clear-cut case of justice soon turned into a legal battle marked by missteps and missed opportunities. On October 10, 2019, Marvin Patterson was sentenced to just 10 years in total, 5 years in prison, and an additional 5 years of extended supervision. However, with credit for time already served, Patterson would likely spend less than 4 years behind bars. For the Brown family, the sentencing was a painful reminder of the justice they felt they had been denied. Kiara Brown's tragic death left a deep wound, and the light punishment handed down to Patterson only seemed to deepen that hurt. The family struggled to understand how someone who had taken their loved one's life could face such a brief sentence. As Patterson's release loomed, the Brown family felt a sense of injustice, knowing that the man responsible for Kiara's death would spend far less time incarcerated than they had hoped for, leaving them to grapple with the emotional toll of the loss and the perceived unfairness of the verdict. Despite the ruling, Kiara's mother, Kenesha Brown Perry, expressed her dismay, saying that the sentence felt like a slap in the face. She described her frustration with the justice system, saying that the sentence did not reflect the gravity of her daughter's death, and said sorry doesn't bring my daughter back. The case was far from providing the closure she had hoped for.
Care how sorry he is, because sorry is not going to bring my daughter back.
Kenesha Brown Perry's heartbreak and disappointment were evident. She felt the sentence failed to bring justice for her daughter and that Marvin Patterson's punishment was far too lenient. I wanted it to feel like justice, she said, expressing how she would never feel at peace with the outcome. As time passed, Patterson was set to be released from prison around the same time Kiara was killed, adding to the emotional weight of her family. Marvin's act of crime was hard to believe, but Dustin Lee Honkin's actions remind us of the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors.
An Iowa meth kingpin convicted of killing 5 people was executed today in Indiana.
In the summer of 1993, Dustin Lee Honkin, a substance manufacturer, and his girlfriend Angela Johnson embarked on a chilling crime spree in Iowa. Their actions led to the disappearance and murder of 5 individuals, including 2 young children. This tragic case became one of the most notorious in Iowa's history and culminated in a federal trial that exposed the dark lengths Honkin went to in order to silence witnesses and protect his substance empire. Honkin's descent into violence began when Greg Nicholson, one of his trusted dealers, decided to cooperate with federal authorities after Honkin's indictment on substance trafficking charges. Nicholson's willingness to testify posed a grave threat to Honkin's substance empire. Fearing that his entire operation would crumble under Nicholson's testimony, Honkin, along with his girlfriend Angela Johnson, devised a sinister plan to silence him. Their ruthlessness escalated when they not only murdered his best friend Nicholson, but also targeted his girlfriend, Lori Duncan, and her 2 young daughters, 10-year-old Candy and 6-year-old Amber. Their deaths served as a chilling message to anyone considering betrayal. Months later, Honkin and Johnson's spree of violence continued with the murder of another potential witness, Terry DeGoose. Johnson's involvement wasn't merely as an accomplice. She played a central role in enabling Honkin's crimes, driven by loyalty and the dangerous desire to protect his empire at any cost. The turning point came in 2000 when Angela Johnson unknowingly provided a fellow inmate with detailed maps revealing the locations of the victim's grave. These maps led authorities to the remains of Nicholson, Duncan, her daughters, and DeGoose. All 5 victims had been brutally executed. Nicholson and Duncan were bound and shot, while the children were killed with single gunshots to their heads. These discoveries reopened investigations and provided the evidence needed to prosecute Honkin and Johnson for their heinous crimes. In 2004, after a complex trial involving over 50 witnesses and extensive evidence, Honan was convicted on 17 counts, including witness tampering and murder while engaged in substance trafficking. The jury imposed the death penalty for the murders of Candy and Amber Duncan, and life imprisonment for the murders of the adults. Honan's elaborate schemes to silence witnesses and evade justice had ultimately failed. As the verdict was delivered, the courtroom bore witness to a mix of emotions. Family members of the victims shed tears of relief, their grief mingled with the solace of justice finally served. Many expressed sorrow for the senseless loss of 5 lives, particularly the innocent children, whose futures were stolen in an instant. Members of law enforcement and the legal team shared quiet nods of acknowledgement, reflecting on the years of painstaking work that culminated in this moment. The gravity of the crimes was palpable, and the sentencing brought a somber closure to a harrowing chapter. The case of Dustin Honan leaves an indelible scar, especially for the families of the victims. The calculated and ruthless nature of the crimes is a sobering reminder of the depths of human depravity. Honan's conviction brought a measure of justice, but the tragedy of 5 lives lost, particularly 2 innocent children, remains a haunting legacy. The courtroom's reaction underscores the enduring impact of these crimes, ensuring the memory of the victims would never fade. The horrifying actions of these individuals highlight the darkest depths of human nature. From the loss of innocent lives to the emotional wounds, these cases serve as a chilling reminder of the unimaginable nature of their crimes. The next video on screen takes you to even more shocking cases. Keep watching.